My parents made me pay rent while funding my siblings' futures. Then I used their own lease against them to stop the exploitation. I turned 18, and my parents immediately began charging me $750 per month to live at home. They said it was to teach me responsibility and prepare me for the real world. I was still in high school, working part-time at a grocery store for the minimum wage, but they insisted. They wanted their money every month, on the first of the month. I barely had anything left after paying them, but I assumed this was how things worked as an adult. I paid every month for the rest of senior year. Then I noticed something strange. My brother, Ethan, turned 18 6 months after me. No rent. My parents explained that he was focused on his music and didn't need the stress. He sat in his room all day, playing video games and occasionally jamming on his guitar for 20 minutes. They bought him a new amplifier for his birthday that cost $1,800. My sister Sophia turned 18 a year later. She does not have to pay rent either. She was apparently preoccupied with her influencer career. She had 350 TikTok followers and only posted about once a week. My parents bought her a ring light and a new phone to help her create content. Meanwhile, after graduating, I was working full-time, attending community college at night, and still paying $750 per month. When I asked why only I paid rent, my mother explained that I was the responsible one who could handle it. My siblings needed more encouragement to pursue their goals. I kept paying while Ethan's musical career consisted of one open mic night where he forgot the lyrics. Sophia's influencer career peaked at 500 followers, despite my parents' payment for professional photos. My parents then raised my rent to $950, citing rising costs and the fact that I now worked full-time so I could afford it. At the age of 20, Ethan had never worked in his life. Sophia worked one shift per week at a boutique for the employee discount, but I paid more. The real kicker came when I overheard my parents discussing their finances. They were depositing my rent money directly into savings accounts for Ethan and Sophia. My rent was literally funding my siblings' futures, and I couldn't save a dime. They referred to it as their education funds, despite the fact that neither sibling attended school. Ethan dropped out of community college after one semester, and Sophia never applied. I attended night classes and paid my own tuition. When I confronted them, they claimed Ethan and Sophia were not as capable as me. They needed the financial cushion more. I was smart enough to do it on my own. That's when I discovered my parents had been telling everyone I was living at home rent-free and mooching off of them. They made themselves look like saints by supporting their adult child while I paid them $950 per month. My extended family thought I was a loser who took advantage of my parents. At family dinners, my aunt would make comments about how I needed to mature and support myself. My parents never corrected her, so I agreed to play their game. I went to them and told them they were correct. I needed more responsibilities. I asked them to draft a formal lease agreement so that I could establish rental history for my credit. They thought this was excellent adulting and drafted an official-looking lease with terms and conditions. They were so proud of teaching me about contracts that they even took a photo of me signing it to show off their responsible parenting. This is what they didn't realize. In our state, once you sign a lease, you have tenant rights, and they just broke about 15 of them. No proper notice of rent increases, no payment receipt system, no maintenance agreements, and no security deposit documentation. They had been entering my room without my knowledge, using my bathroom while theirs was occupied, and taking food I purchased without permission are all violations. I began documenting everything. Every time my mother entered my room, she borrowed something without asking. Every time my father used my laptop without permission. Every time they gave Ethan or Sophia money, they instructed me to pay more. They wrote the lease to allow for quiet enjoyment of the premises. It was difficult to enjoy when Ethan practiced his guitar badly at midnight, directly above my room. The lease specified access to common areas. Sophia's photography equipment is always spread across the living room, making it difficult to access. I sent them formal written complaints for each violation. They laughed at first, thinking I was overdramatic. Then I stopped paying the rent. I told them I was withholding it because of unresolved lease violations, as was my legal right as a tenant. They lost their minds and demanded the cash. I offered to pay if they resolved the violations. They claimed they did not have to fix anything in their own home. Cool. Then I did not have to pay. They tried to kick me out, but I showed them the lease they had written. They'd have to formally evict me, which could take months. They'd have to go to court and explain why they were evicting one child while the other two remained free. They would have to inform a judge about the savings accounts funded by my rent. They'd have to admit they were lying to everyone about me being free. The court records would be made public. Everyone would know. My mother panicked and offered to reduce my rent back to $750. I countered with zero, as did my siblings. My father's face turned bright red, and he began yelling that I was being disrespectful and ungrateful for everything they had done for me. His voice became louder with each word. My mother jumped in right away, saying, "They gave me a roof over my head. And this is how I repaid them. By threatening legal action like a stranger." She placed her hand on her chest as if I had physically hurt her. My heart was pounding, but I remained calm. I explained that I was not threatening anything and was simply asking for the same treatment that Ethan and Sophia received. $0 per month. My dad's face turned even redder, and he stormed out of the room. My mother looked at me for a second, as if she wanted to say something else, before following him out. I stood alone in the kitchen, holding my printed documentation of every lease violation. The papers felt heavy in my hands. I could hear the bedroom door slam upstairs. That night I lay in bed trying to concentrate on my homework, but I could hear my parents arguing loudly in their bedroom. The walls in this house were thin enough that I could understand most of what they were saying. My mother's voice came through first, saying they should simply let me stay rent-free to avoid problems. My father's voice rose again, insisting that this would be a reward for my bad behavior. He told me that I needed to learn respect. My mother said something quieter that I couldn't hear. Then my father mentioned something about not being manipulated by their own daughter. The argument went on for more than an hour. I gave up on my homework and lay there listening. Their voices gradually became quieter, and I heard their television turn on. The next morning, I came downstairs for breakfast and the kitchen was tense. My parents were already at the table, eating cereal and not talking to one another. Ethan walked in, scratching his head, and inquired as to what was going on, having heard yelling the night before. I poured myself a cup of coffee and explained the situation while my parents sat silently. I told him about the rent I'd been paying for years, the lease violations, and the savings accounts I funded with my own money. Ethan actually laughed and said I was overreacting about a few $100s per month. He took a bowl from the cabinet and said, "Everyone pays rent when they're adults." I pointed out that he did not pay rent. He shrugged, explaining that it was different because he was focused on his music. I asked when he had last practiced. He didn't respond. Sophia came downstairs in her pajamas holding her phone. She must have overheard some of the conversation because she jumped right in, accusing me of being selfish and making everything about me when they were simply trying to pursue their dreams. Her voice had that whiny tone she used to elicit sympathy. I looked right at her and told her that my rent money was literally funding her dreams. I told her about the savings account. She opened her mouth but nothing came out. She looked at my parents, expecting them to deny it. My mother gazed down at her cereal bowl. My father got up and made a lot of noise while putting his dishes in the sink. Sophia's face turned pale, and she sat down without taking any food. That evening, my parents summoned me to the living room. They sat together on the couch, serious expressions. My father cleared his throat, saying they had discussed it and wanted to present a counteroffer. As a compromise, they reduced my monthly rent to $350. My mother nodded and agreed that was more than fair. I sat in the chair across from them and told them that the compromise was $0, just like my siblings. My father began to interrupt, but I continued speaking. I suggested that if they preferred, we let a judge decide what was fair. I took out my phone and showed them photos of the lease they'd written. Photographs of my payment records. Photographs of all documented violations. My mom's face turned white. My father stood up quickly and announced that he would be kicking me out immediately. His voice shook as he said it. I remained seated and calmly reminded him that this was illegal without proper eviction proceedings. I explained that he would need to file paperwork with the court. He'd need to wait for a hearing date. He'd have to explain to a judge why he was evicting one child while two others remained there free. I saw my mother's eyes widen as she realized I knew my rights. She grabbed my father's arm and pulled him back down to the couch. He was breathing rapidly as if he had been running. There was silence for quite some time. My parents then left the room without saying another word. My co-worker Katie approached me during our morning break the next day, so I must have appeared stressed. She inquired whether I was all right. I hesitated, but then it all came out. During our lunch break in the break room, I told her everything, including the rent, which my siblings had not paid, the savings accounts, and the lease violations. Katie's eyes grew large and she kept saying, "I can't believe my parents would do that." She stated that her own parents had problems, but at least they treated all of the children equally. She asked if I had any other places to stay. I told her I was staying because they couldn't legally force me to leave. Katie pulled out her phone and began texting someone. She told me that her husband, Barry, worked in property management and was very knowledgeable about tenant rights. She insisted I speak with him because he'd helped others in similar situations before. She claimed Barry had witnessed landlords engaging in various illegal activities and was always prepared to deal with them. I wasn't sure about including more people, but Katie wouldn't take no for an answer. She texted Barry back and forth for a minute before telling me he wanted to meet with me. She said he could review my lease and documents. I agreed because at this point, I needed all the assistance I could get. That weekend, I met Barry at a coffee shop near my workplace. He was a tall man in his 40s with glasses and a friendly smile. Katie had already shown him some details, so he knew the basics. I brought my folder containing the lease and all of my documents. Barry laid everything out on the table between our coffee cups and began reading it carefully. He took his time writing notes on a pad of paper. After about 20 minutes, he looked up and said, "My parents violated multiple tenant rights." He pointed to specific sections of the lease that they had written and explained each violation. There was no proper notice for the rent increase from $750 to $950. There is no receipt system for my payments. Despite the fact that the lease mentioned it, there was no documentation for the security deposit. He went through my photos of the times they had entered my room without my knowledge. Barry confirmed that I had a strong legal case if this went to court. He stated that most judges disapproved of parents financially exploiting their adult children. He explained that the lease my parents wrote provided me with more protections than they realized. He claimed I was doing the right thing by documenting everything and standing firm. He wrote down the name of a tenant rights attorney he knew who occasionally offered free consultations. He advised me to contact this attorney if my parents persisted in their demands. I felt relieved to have someone confirm that I wasn't crazy for fighting this. Barry stated that he would be willing to testify as an expert witness if the situation required it. He advised me to continue documenting everything and not let my parents pressure me into paying or leaving. We spent another hour discussing my options, and he answered all of my questions. I left the coffee shop feeling more confident than I had in days. Barry jotted down the attorney's name and phone number on a napkin. Crystal Winters. He claimed she worked with young people dealing with family landlord issues and occasionally took cases for free when she believed someone was being taken advantage of. I thanked him and placed the napkin in my wallet. When I arrived home that night, I went straight to my room and took out the napkin. I stared at the phone number for a while before calling. A receptionist responded, and I explained my situation as briefly as I could. She put me on hold for a couple of minutes. When she returned, she mentioned that Crystal had an opening for Thursday afternoon if I could make it. I agreed right away, despite the fact that it meant leaving work early. The following few days passed slowly. I carried my documentation folder in my backpack wherever I went. My parents tried to talk to me several times, but I kept the conversations short. My mom asked if we could sit down and talk like adults. I told her we could discuss it after I spoke with my lawyer. Her face turned pale when I said that word. On Tuesday night, I was in my room studying when I heard a knock. Before I could respond, my mother opened the door. She had tears running down her cheeks. She sat on the edge of my bed without asking and began crying more. She claimed I was tearing the family apart over money. She asked why I couldn't simply be the responsible one, as I had always been. She claimed Ethan and Sophia looked up to me, and now I was setting a bad example by involving lawyers. I shut my textbook and looked at her. I asked her directly why being responsible required me to be treated worse than my siblings. She wiped her eyes and stated that it was not her intention to treat me worse. She said Ethan and Sophia simply needed more assistance than I did. I asked her why they needed additional assistance. She couldn't give me an honest answer. She just kept saying that they needed help to find their way. I pointed out that I too was discovering my path, but I had to pay for it myself and give them money every month. She stood up and claimed I was being difficult on purpose. She left my room, and I could hear her crying in the hallway. On Thursday, I left work at 2 p.m. to make my 3 o'clock appointment. Crystal's office was located in a small building downtown. The waiting room had mismatched chairs and magazines from last year. The receptionist smiled and told me Crystal would be ready in a few minutes. I sat down with my folder in my lap. A woman walked out of the back office. She was probably in her 40s, with dark hair pulled back and glasses. She walked right over to me and extended her hand. Crystal Winters. She offered a firm handshake and made direct eye contact. She led me back to her office, which featured a large desk covered in files and papers. She cleared a space and told me to sit down. I opened the folder and began explaining everything. She listened without interrupting. She jotted notes on a yellow pad. After I finished, she leaned back in her chair. She said she had seen cases like mine before. She claimed that parents financially exploited their adult children on a regular basis, convincing themselves that it was for the kids' benefit. She claimed that the lease my parents wrote provided me with strong legal protection. She asked if she could keep my documentation and make copies. I said yes. Crystal called in her paralegal. Luke entered carrying a camera. He was younger than Crystal, probably in his late 20s. He began photographing every page in my folder, including the lease, my payment records, and the written complaints I had sent my parents regarding lease violations. He worked methodically and did not overlook anything. Crystal explained that everything needed to be properly documented in case it went to court. She stated that judges took these cases seriously when they discovered clear evidence of exploitation. Luke finished taking photos and returned the originals to me. Crystal stated that she would write a letter to my parents explaining their violations and my rights. The letter stated that I would resume paying rent once all violations were resolved and I was given the same terms as my siblings, $0 per month. I felt relief wash over me. Having a professional on my side made everything feel more genuine and less dramatic. Crystal said she'd have the letter ready by Monday and would mail it certified, requiring my parents to sign for it. She advised not to be surprised if they reacted negatively. She advised me to document any threats or harassment. I thanked her, and she told me not to worry about the payment right now. She'd figure something out because she despised seeing parents take advantage of their children. I left her office feeling stronger than I had been in months. The letter arrived at my parents' home on Wednesday. I was at work when my phone rang. My father, I let it go to voicemail. He called 3 additional times. Then my mother called. I didn't respond. During my lunch break, I checked the voicemails. My father was furious about how I got lawyers involved in family business. He claimed I was destroying our relationship for a few $100s. My mother sent me a message in which she cried and said I was ruining everything. When I arrived home that evening, my father was waiting in the living room. He began yelling the moment I walked in. How dare I involve lawyers in this? How dare I threaten them in their own home? My mom was crying on the couch. I remained calm and stated that I was not threatening anyone. I was just asking for the same treatment that Ethan and Sophia received. My father's face turned red. He said, "If I want to play legal games, maybe Ethan and Sophia should start paying rent as well." He yelled for them to come downstairs. Ethan came down first, looking perplexed. Sophia followed a minute later. My father informed them that starting next month, they would both be paying $350 in rent. Ethan's mouth dropped open. He said he could not afford it. My father asked why not. Ethan stammered, "I don't have a job." My father said that was exactly the point. If I didn't have to pay, nobody would get a free ride anymore. Sophia burst into tears, explaining that she was building her career and couldn't afford to pay rent. My father said she should figure it out then. Ethan looked at me like it was my fault. I simply stared back at him. This was the first time he'd had to think about money, and it was obvious on his face. He asked my father if he was serious. My father replied, "Completely serious. Everyone pays or nobody pays." My mother was still crying on the couch. Ethan returned upstairs without saying another word. Sophia followed him. Sophia made a TikTok post the following day. I didn't notice it at first, but Katie showed it to me at work. Sophia was in her room, looking sad, with a text overlay about toxic family members causing drama. An audio track about being misunderstood played in the background. The video received maybe 30 views. Katie rolled her eyes and said, "My sister was ridiculous." That evening, my mother posted the video to Facebook with a lengthy caption about how difficult it is when your children turn against you. She didn't go into detail, only mentioning family struggles and staying strong. I read the comments. My aunt wrote that some children did not appreciate their parents' sacrifices. Other relatives agreed. Nobody knew what was happening. They all assumed I was the problem based on my parents' lies. On Saturday morning, my aunt called me directly. I almost didn't respond, but decided I was done hiding. She immediately started talking about how I was being selfish and tearing the family apart. I interrupted her. I asked if she knew I was paying $950 per month in rent. She became quiet. I told her the entire story. How I had paid since I was 18. How Ethan and Sophia refused to pay anything. My parents put my rent money into savings accounts for my siblings. How they informed everyone that I lived freely. My aunt didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "I have no idea." She claimed my parents always made it appear as if I was the one taking advantage. She apologized for judging me without knowing the truth. She admitted that the favoritism was wrong and apologized for the comments she had made at family dinners. I thanked her for listening. She said she'd call my parents and get their perspective, but she believed me. After we hung up, I felt as if someone in my family had finally understood what I was going through. Within an hour, my phone began to light up with texts from relatives I had barely spoken to. My uncle wanted to know if I had been paying rent. My cousin questioned why my parents never mentioned it. Even my grandmother called to see what was going on with the family. I responded to each one with the same basic information. $950 per month since I turned 18. Ethan and Sophia didn't pay anything. My rent went into their savings accounts. My parents told everyone I lived freely. The responses came in fast. My uncle said that wasn't correct. My cousin said she'd always wondered why my parents treated me like I was lazy when I worked full-time. My grandmother said she needed to talk to my mother about this. By dinner time my phone was constantly buzzing. My parents' phones must have been worse because I could hear my mother on the phone in the kitchen, becoming louder with each call. She kept saying it was a private family business that people should stay out of. At one point, my father grabbed the phone from her and told whoever was calling that I was intentionally making them look bad. I stayed in my room, locked the door, and let them deal with the mess they'd made by lying to everyone. My mother knocked on my door the next morning. She appeared tired, and her eyes were red. She explained that my father wanted to make me an offer to settle everything. I followed her downstairs where my father sat at the kitchen table, holding a calculator and some papers. He stated that they would refund 6 months' rent to demonstrate good faith. That cost $5,200. In exchange, I agreed to stop discussing family finances with relatives. I took a photo of the papers with my phone and told them I'd think about it. I then texted the photo to Crystal. She called back within 20 minutes. Her voice was sharp as she warned me not to accept anything without proper legal documentation. She said the offer was an attempt to control the narrative and silence me. She inquired whether there were any conditions attached. I read her the papers, and she made a disgusted sound. She claimed they were trying to buy my silence while admitting no wrongdoing. She instructed me to reject it and let her handle the negotiations. 2 days later, my father sent me an email with an attached document. I opened it and began reading. They'd refund the $5,200, but I'd have to agree to pay $350 per month from now on. I also had to sign a document stating that I would not discuss family finances with anyone other than my immediate family. There was an entire paragraph about protecting family privacy and setting respectful boundaries. I sent it to Crystal without responding to my parents. She called me that evening, sounding annoyed. She claimed that my parents were still trying to control me while pretending to compromise. She inquired whether I wanted her to respond. I said yes. She told me she'd send them a letter outlining her terms, and they could accept it or see me in housing court. Crystal's letter reached my parents' house 3 days later. I was at work when my father called, screaming into the phone. He claimed my lawyer was threatening them and making unreasonable demands. I inquired as to the specific demands. He stated that Crystal requested a full year's refund and no future rent. I told him those seemed fair because that's what Ethan and Sophia received. He told me I was being ridiculous and hung up. My parents said nothing to me during dinner that night. When Ethan asked what was going on, my mother told him it was between them and me. Sophia scrolled through her phone, ignoring everyone. The silence felt heavy, but I did not try to fill it. My parents went 4 days without speaking to me except when absolutely necessary. Then my father showed up at work during my afternoon shift. I was restocking shelves when I noticed him walking toward me. He began talking before he even approached me. He said we needed to talk about the lawyer situation as adults. I informed him that Crystal was handling everything, and that all communication should go through her. He raised his voice, saying I was his daughter and he had the right to speak to me. Other customers began looking over. My manager emerged from the back office. My father kept saying that I was tearing the family apart over money. My manager stepped between us and asked my father to leave. My father looked at me as if I had betrayed him. Then he turned and walked away. My manager asked if I was all right. I nodded, but my hands shook. She advised me to take my break earlier. That evening Katie called me. She explained that Barry wanted to know if I needed a place to stay. She stated that if things at home worsened, they could use their guest room. I felt a release in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. Having somewhere to go made everything seem less scary. I thanked her and promised to let her know. She stated that the offer was valid at any time. After we hung up, I sat on my bed and looked around my room. Knowing I could leave if I needed to made staying feel like an option, rather than a trap. Crystal set a deadline of 1 week from her letter. On the 5th day, my mother visited my room. She said they would consult their own lawyer. She stated that fighting this in court would be expensive and embarrassing for everyone. She inquired as to what it would take for me to drop everything. I informed her that Crystal's terms were fair. My siblings pay no rent and have received a full refund for the previous year. My mother's face became tight. She stated that it was $10,200. I stated that was what I had paid them. She departed without saying anything else. Day 6 passed without a word. On day 7, my father knocked on my door in the morning before I left for work. He said they had agreed on Crystal's terms. His voice sounded flat. He said they'd refund me for the entire year and let me live rent-free in the future, just like Ethan and Sophia. I inquired whether he was putting that in writing. He stated that their lawyer was drafting the agreement. I told him to send it to Crystal. He nodded before walking away. I got ready for work, feeling strange. I won, but it didn't feel like it. It felt like something in my family had broken and wouldn't be repaired. The refund check arrived 4 days later. $10,200 was made out to me. I stared at it for a long time before going to a different bank than my parents did. I opened a savings account and deposited the entire amount. The teller smiled and congratulated me on beginning to save. I thanked her and took the receipt. Walking out to my car, I checked the balance printed on the paper. All of the money I had paid them was in an account with my name on it. It felt genuine in a way it hadn't before. I'd been correct to fight for fair treatment. The money proved it. The atmosphere at home changed completely after that. My parents stopped trying to talk to me about anything other than basic household chores. Ethan avoided me entirely, spending the majority of his time in his room. Sophia walked past me as if I were not there. Family dinners took place in complete silence, with everyone eating quickly and leaving the table. My mother attempted to strike up a conversation several times, but it fizzled out quickly when no one else joined in. I ate my food and returned to my room. The house felt cold for reasons other than temperature. My mother knocked on my door early the following morning. She entered without waiting for me to respond and sat on the edge of my bed. She began discussing household expenses and how they really needed my rent money to keep things running. I sat up, looking at her. I mentioned that she and Dad had been putting my rent into savings accounts for Ethan and Sophia. If they needed it for household expenses, why was it sitting in my siblings' bank accounts? She opened and closed her mouth again. Her face turned red and she stood up quickly. She left my room without saying anything more. 2 weeks passed with little conversation. Then one night at dinner, my father cleared his throat and made an announcement. Beginning next month, Ethan and Sophia will each pay $350 in rent. Ethan dropped his fork, which clattered against his plate. He started complaining that it wasn't fair and that he couldn't afford it. My father held up his hand and told Ethan to stop talking. He said that if I didn't have to pay, nobody would get a free ride anymore. Sophia's mouth dropped open, but she said nothing. I kept eating my food without looking at anyone. Ethan pushed his chair back and stomped up to his room. Sophia followed him a minute later. My parents sat in silence as I finished my dinner alone with them. The following week, Ethan was suddenly extremely busy. He printed out his resume and began applying for jobs online. He visited the mall and dropped off applications at each store. Within 5 days, he had an interview at a downtown music store. He returned home 2 days later and informed everyone that he had gotten the job. He'd be working 4 days a week to assist customers and organize inventory. My father nodded and said, "That's good." Ethan looked at me across the table, but I just ate my meal. It was funny how quickly he could find work when he needed it. He'd been saying for 2 years that no one was hiring and that he should focus on his music instead. It turned out that jobs were available the entire time. Sophia took a different approach. She stopped going to her boutique job and told my parents she couldn't afford rent while pursuing her influencer career. She needed to devote all of her time to content creation if she wanted to increase her following. My mother looked at my father, and he shook his head. He told Sophia she had 2 options. Pay $350 per month or find another place to live. Sophia's eyes widened and she began crying. She claimed they were ruining her dreams and being unfair. My father did not change his expression. He told her she had until the end of the week to decide. Sophia ran upstairs and I heard her door slam. The next day she was on her laptop applying for jobs. She was hired at a coffee shop near the mall within 5 days. Living at home felt wrong, even though I wasn't paying rent. The air was heavy and nobody looked at each other during meals. I started considering getting my own place. I texted Barry and asked if he could help me figure out what I could afford and what I should look for in a lease. He texted back right away, inviting me to come by his office that weekend. Saturday morning, I drove to his workplace, a property management company. He had a large desk filled with folders and a computer with 2 monitors. He pulled up a chair for me and we talked about my finances for about an hour. He showed me how to figure out what percentage of my income should go toward rent. He discussed security deposits and utility costs. He looked up apartment listings in my area and explained what I should look for in lease terms. By the end, I had a list of 5 places to look into and felt like I knew what I was doing. Annie approached me after my community college class that week. She taught my business fundamentals course and was always friendly to me. She mentioned that my assignments were improving and that I appeared to be more focused in class. She inquired if everything was fine. I told her about the housing situation with my parents and how resolving it had given me mental space. She nodded and explained that stress affects everything, including schoolwork. She told me she was proud of how I handled the situation and that I was doing well in her class. It was nice to have someone notice the positive changes. I thanked her and went to my next class, feeling better than I had in weeks. I spent the next 2 weeks looking for apartments. The majority of them were either too expensive or in bad neighborhoods. Then I discovered a small studio apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building. It had a small kitchen and bathroom, but the main room was quite spacious. The landlord showed me around and explained that the rent was $900 per month, which included all utilities. I did the math in my head. This was less than the $950 my parents had charged me. I'd pay less to live on my own than I did in their house. The irony was not lost on me. I filled out the application that day and was approved 5 days later. My mom's face changed when I told her I was moving out. She expressed genuine sadness and asked if we could mend our relationship. I told her honestly that I needed time to decide whether I wanted them in my life after how they had treated me. She began crying, and my father wrapped his arm around her. He said nothing, but his jaw was clenched. I went upstairs and started packing my belongings. I had a month until my lease started, but I wanted to be prepared. The week before I moved, Ethan knocked on my door. He asked if he could help me move my belongings to the new apartment. I was surprised, but agreed. On moving day, Ethan arrived with his car. We loaded boxes and furniture, making 3 trips back and forth. On the last trip, he told me that he had no idea how unfair things had been until he had to get a job himself. He apologized for laughing at me when I first brought up the rent situation. He admitted to living in a bubble, and our parents had allowed him to stay there. I told him I appreciated his apology. We carried the last box up to my apartment, and he assisted me in arranging the furniture. Before leaving, he hugged me and expressed his desire for us to remain close. Sophia did not apologize, but she did stop making vague complaints about me on social media. Katie showed me that Sophia had deleted all of her posts about family drama and toxic siblings. Sophia received her first real paycheck from the coffee shop 1 week after I moved out. She posted a picture of it with the caption, "Honest work and earning your own way." She was now working 4 days a week and appeared to be less concerned with becoming famous on the internet. Sophia had begun discussing the possibility of attending community college next semester, according to my mother. Reality had struck both of my siblings, and they were handling it differently, but they were dealing with it. Moving into my studio felt different from the beginning. I chose a small secondhand couch and dark blue fabric and positioned it against the wall near the window. The kitchen had just enough space for a small table and 2 chairs, and I bought real dishes instead of paper plates, as I had done at my parents' house, to avoid arguments over who would wash them. I hung up some posters I'd had rolled up in my closet for years because Sophia always said they were ugly, and my mother would take them down. They were now on my walls, and nobody could say anything. I cooked actual meals for myself and ate them whenever I wanted, without Ethan showing up to steal half of my food or my father helping himself to the leftovers I had been saving. My belongings remained exactly where I put them. My shampoo remained in my shower. My snacks remained in my cabinet. Nobody borrowed my laptop, towel, or phone charger. The level of freedom exceeded my expectations. A week after I moved in, Crystal called to inform me that she was closing my case file. She stated that she never charged me for any of her work because parents who exploit their children financially made her very angry, and she was happy to assist me in standing up for myself. I tried to offer her something, but she refused and told me to use the money for my future instead. I thanked her about 5 times before hanging up, promising to send her a card. Katie and I began hanging out on weekends after she helped me get through the worst of the conflict with my parents. We'd go get coffee, walk around the mall, or just watch movies at her place with Barry. Having a genuine friend who knew the whole story and still supported me meant more than I could express. She never judged me for my legal issues or made me feel bad for going against my family. She simply listened and said I deserved better treatment. After 3 months in my new apartment, I had established a routine that felt stable for the first time in many years. I worked my shifts, went to class, came home to my own space, and saved money every month because I no longer had to pay rent. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother, asking if we could meet for coffee and talk. I stared at the message for a few minutes before saying I'd meet her at a coffee shop near campus. Part of me wondered if she was really ready to admit what she'd done wrong, or if this was just another attempt to guilt me into returning. I arrived at the coffee shop first and ordered a regular coffee with cream. My mom arrived 10 minutes later, looking tired and older than I remembered. She ordered tea and we sat at a corner table away from the others. She started talking right away and expressed her genuine regret for the favoritism and financial exploitation. She explained that she had convinced herself that I was stronger and more capable than Ethan and Sophia, so it was acceptable to treat me differently and expect more of me. But now she realized how wrong that was, and how much damage it had caused. She admitted to using my supposed strength as an excuse to take advantage of me while babysitting my siblings. Hearing her say the words aloud made something tight in my chest loosen up slightly. I told her that I appreciated her apology, but that rebuilding trust would take time. She nodded, stating that she understood and would wait as long as I needed. 2 days after meeting with my mother, my father sent me an email. It was shorter and less personal than my mother's apology, but he admitted that he was wrong to charge me rent while allowing Ethan and Sophia to live freely. He apologized for not treating me fairly and expressed hope that we could improve our relationship moving forward. The email felt stiff and awkward, as if he had struggled with every word. But I appreciated that he had at least attempted to admit his mistake. I responded briefly, thanking him for his apology. Over the next few months, I began meeting my parents for dinner at restaurants every couple of weeks. We kept things neutral and talked about everyday topics like work, school, and the weather. They were learning to treat me as an independent adult, rather than a source of income or a problem to be solved. My mother stopped trying to give me advice on every decision I made, and my father stopped acting as if I owed him anything for raising me. The dynamic had changed, and it felt more balanced. Ethan and I actually became closer after I moved out. He began texting me more frequently, and we would occasionally grab lunch together after his shifts at the music store. He told me that after having to start working and paying his own way, he realized how unfair things had been. He apologized for laughing at me when I first complained about the rent situation, and he admitted to living in a bubble created by our parents. He was still working at the music store and seemed to enjoy having structure and purpose in his life, rather than just sitting around playing video games all day. He even began to take guitar lessons seriously and practice regularly. A year after moving into my studio apartment, I was performing better than I had ever done. My grades at community college were good, so I started looking into four-year universities to transfer to. The money I'd saved from the rent refund, combined with not paying rent during my final months at home, had laid a solid financial foundation. I had nearly $8,000 in my savings account and a solid plan for the future. My relationship with my family was better now because it was built on mutual respect rather than obligation and exploitation. Standing up for myself had been difficult and frightening, but it taught everyone in my family that fair treatment was not something they could bargain for. I was worthy of the same consideration as everyone else, and I would never accept anything less.